I'm Adrienne Floreen. I'm an independent investigative reporter and a documentarian. I live in Humboldt County, California with my family and my cats. These are some of my cats. Sometimes roommates also live with me, and sometimes we have house guests. Sometimes they even leave their stuff in the corner of my living room. Every so often, I like to read the news online, and sometimes I like to comment about it, usually only to my friends. Rarely do I make a video where I comment about the news on YouTube. But recently, I've been following a news story online. Hey, you're not supposed to be on the table. But recently, I've been following a news story online. Ebola. And now, I'm going to comment about it. I'm Adrienne Floreen, and this is Adrienne Floreen, Comments on the News. If you haven't already watched my other video where I comment about the news, which is called Adrienne Floreen Comments on the News, Ebola, Swine Flu, Obamacare, and Sick Days, please watch it. I'm making this video because since I made my last video, several of my dire predictions have already come true. I predicted that the man who was infected with Ebola in Texas was going to die, and he did. And I predicted that it was possible that one of the nurses or doctors who was treating him was going to get infected with Ebola. Today, when I looked at the news on my computer this morning, I saw that my prediction had come true. But how could this have happened? The government's been telling us that hospitals in America would know how to handle Ebola when it got here. Actually, at first they said they would be prepared for it if it got here. Quickly, that became being prepared for it when it got here. At first, the U.S. government denied that Ebola was even going to come here. Then they said that it was inevitable that it would come here, but that hospitals would know how to deal with it. Now I'm reading this webpage and I'm reading an article from today's USA Today, and it says, the CDC is tasked with readying the nation for an Ebola outbreak, then leading the national response. So what they're saying there is that there is going to be an outbreak, but they're trying to reassure you that they're prepared to respond. I'm not so sure about that. Take the case of this nurse in Texas who got infected with Ebola. They're saying that she might have gotten infected with it while removing her protective gear. The same goes for the nurse in Spain who got Ebola. They're also saying that she got it when she was removing her protective gear. So why are these nurses not able to remove their protective gear without infecting themselves with Ebola? I think that all nurses and doctors who are going to work with Ebola patients should be required to pass a test to make sure they're competent enough to take off their protective gear without contaminating themselves. They should put the protective gear on, and then they should spray them from head to toe with dark blue dye and make them take the protective gear off without getting one single drop of dye on their skin. If they can do that, then they should allow them in the room to treat the patient with Ebola. If they can't, maybe they shouldn't be working as a nurse or a doctor, but they definitely shouldn't be working around Ebola patients. Because Ebola can live on the surface for hours or possibly even days. Who knows that when they contaminated themselves, they didn't also contaminate one of their own personal items, and then later touch it and contaminate the surface in a public place, exposing some random strangers to Ebola. Is anyone in Dallas or in America safe even today? I feel like there's a possibility that I could go to the grocery store and touch something that someone else touched and catch Ebola right now. And now I'm reading another article on the Washington Post. This article is talking about the nurse in Texas who got infected with Ebola. And they say, she found she got infected, and she immediately did what she was supposed to have done. So even in this troublesome situation, the system is working. Now I would like to comment about that comment. If the system was working, there wouldn't be a troublesome situation. How could the system be working if there's a troublesome situation caused by a failure of the system? That proves that the system is not working. Now they're saying that 40% of Americans believe that there's going to be an Ebola outbreak in America within the next few months. And they're saying that people are paranoid, or people are afraid unreasonably, you know? I think that people are just becoming aware. And that's why I'm making this video. Because I think that there is going to be a big Ebola outbreak in America. A few days ago, a doctor was quoted as saying there's essentially zero risk for contracting Ebola in the United States. And he was talking about the risk to doctors or nurses or other healthcare workers. Obviously, he was wrong. I would say that there was 100% risk that it was going to happen, and there's 100% risk that it's going to happen again. So be careful. It's not safe to go to the hospital anymore. You may catch Ebola just because someone else who has Ebola may have been in there, and they may not have been properly handled or properly diagnosed. They say they're not sure how the nurses got Ebola, but I know how they got it. Life finds a way. If you don't know where that quote is from, it's from Jurassic Park. You can watch the scene from the movie on YouTube if you want to, which you can find by searching for Life Finds a Way on YouTube. It's the scene where Dr. Malcolm says, "The kind of control you're attempting simply is not possible. If there is one thing the history of evolution has taught us, it's that life will not be contained. Life breaks free. It expands to new territories and crashes through barriers, painfully, maybe even dangerously." And then later on he says, "Life finds a way." That's a famous quote from the movie because it was considered to be so controversial. A lot of people were upset because they thought that the movie Jurassic Park was meant to promote chaos theory, which they disagreed with because they thought that it wasn't rational. But really, chaos theory is only another way of rephrasing Murphy's Law. I talked about Murphy's Law a little bit in my last video, but I'll explain it again later on in this video. And here's another troubling thing from the news. They canceled the elections in Liberia due to Ebola. So that brings me to the obvious question. If they can cancel the elections in Liberia due to Ebola, could they cancel the elections in any country due to Ebola? Could they cancel the elections in America due to Ebola? Basically, if any dictator in any country in the world wanted to stay in power, all they would have to do is say they had Ebola in their country, whether they had it or not. And then they could shut down the whole country. They could have martial law. They could even cancel the elections. And if there was anybody that they didn't like, such as an activist who was protesting against the government, they could say, that person might be infected with Ebola, and they could force them to be quarantined. And if the person died, the government could blame it on Ebola. Nobody would ever suspect the government. When I wash my hands with soap, and I wash them very well. I wash them all the way up here on my wrists, where most people don't wash. But I still smoke marijuana out of the same pipe as other people. And that brings me to a point. The government has to make people trust them now. Because if there is an Ebola outbreak, one of the things that you've seen, if you've read the news in the past, is that Ebola has been spread by people who don't trust the government. People in Liberia who are afraid to go to the hospitals will hide their sick and dying relatives at home, or even hide dead bodies because they're afraid of the government. A lot of people in America also don't trust the government because the government has shown that they're untrustworthy. Instead of dealing with serious problems in the world, they're fighting unnecessary and unjust wars or hassling people for using medical marijuana, like I do. The government has to make people trust them now. And to do that, they have to get rid of silly laws, such as laws that make drugs like marijuana illegal. Because people are not going to want to tell the government who they smoked marijuana with, or who they did other drugs with, because they are afraid that they will get in trouble. People are going to be afraid to tell the government who they came into contact with, for many reasons, not just because of drugs. Think of prostitution. Prostitution would be another example, where people might not want to tell the government who they came into contact with. The government should remove all roadblocks that would potentially prevent somebody from getting medical care, because if somebody has Ebola and they don't go to the hospital right away, they could not only spread it, but they could die. Because if they don't get the right medical care right away, like the man in Texas who had Ebola, they're probably going to die. My health insurance covers me in California only. If I got sick in another state, I would have to decide if I could afford to go to a doctor or not. The government has to immediately make all health insurance policies cover you in whatever state you're in, whether you live there or not. Since I made my last video, I've found out what's making my cat sick. They actually have two infections, a viral infection and a bacterial infection. What's this? My cats are sick from two infections, a viral infection and a bacterial infection. They need antibiotics and antiviral drugs, possibly for a few months. But they will get better. When my first cat got sick, the vet gave me amoxicillin. 2 years later, and several $1,000s of vet trips later, I had my cats tested. The test cost $160, and it tested for the most common viruses and bacteria that can make cats sick. My cats tested positive for 2 of them. Neither of them are cured by the amoxicillin that the vet's been giving me this whole time. So I've been giving my cats unnecessary medication that doesn't actually kill the bacteria that's making them sick. Now they're taking doxycycline, and I have to medicate all of them for months. They also are going to need antiviral medications, including eye drops and oral medications, because they have feline herpes virus, a virus that's not contagious to people, but is contagious to other cats. My point is, if my first cat had been properly diagnosed, I could have possibly prevented my other cats from getting sick. Then maybe Fluffhead wouldn't have gone blind. And then maybe Survivor wouldn't have had to make a $300 emergency trip to the veterinarian. And I could have saved thousands of dollars in vet bills. This is an example of why I think that every time someone gets sick, they should test them to see what's making them sick. If they did that, they would never have had the Ebola outbreak in the first place, because they would have found it earlier, and they possibly would have been able to contain it. And if they did that, the man in Dallas would have been diagnosed with Ebola right away, rather than being sent home with antibiotics, which killed bacteria and not viruses. The virus may have even caused some of my cats to be born with deformed tails. Like this cat, whose name is Slate. As you can see, this cat's tail is crooked. You see that? That's because he was born with a spinal deformity, which caused his tail to be deformed. Cats. In my last video where I commented about the news, I did talk about the difference between a bacteria and a virus. I'm not going to repeat that explanation now, but I recommend that you look at it, because it's interesting and educational. I think that all doctors need a basic course explaining to them what a virus is and how it uses your own DNA to replicate itself. A lot of doctors don't even understand what viruses are, and because of that, they're not as afraid of them as they should be. For example, I'm going to show you my wart. I have several warts on each foot, and I've been trying to get them removed for over a year. Can you see that right there? I'm not going to touch it, but right there on the bottom of my foot is a wart. There's another one on my toe and one on my heel. I have several warts on the other foot as well. What surprises me is that 4 doctors in 3 different states have touched my wart with their bare hands, and then they haven't immediately washed their hands. One doctor even told me that everyone was already infected with the wart virus anyway, so it didn't matter. But when I buy a bottle of wart remover at the store, and I read the instructions, it says, warning, the virus that causes warts is highly contagious. It comes with an applicator to put the medication on your wart, and it says, do not touch this applicator after touching your wart. There are actually over 100 types of the wart virus. Some cause warts on your skin, others cause warts on your genitals, others don't cause warts at all, but they cause cancer. So even if somebody was already infected with one form of the wart virus, that doesn't mean that they would want to expose themselves to other forms of it. The same goes for Ebola. They're saying in the news that if somebody survives one variety of Ebola, they could still get sick from another strain. One of these web pages seems to be saying that Ebola is going to mutate to become less dangerous once it gets used to being in the human body. I don't think that's true. Basically, they're saying that viruses that are less deadly are more likely to survive in the human race long term, but I disagree with that. Ebola seems to be doing a pretty good job of surviving, whether it kills the person or not. In fact, the dead body is the most infectious, and a lot of people seem to be getting infected by touching dead bodies. So it seems to be doing a pretty good job at spreading without becoming less deadly, like this webpage says. I really don't know where they get that science. That science doesn't make sense to me. I think it might become less deadly because people are becoming immune to it, but not because it's mutating to become less deadly. In fact, it's probably going to mutate to become more deadly and to spread easier. And now they're saying that Ebola is going to be like AIDS. It's going to be here permanently. It's going to represent a constant threat to the human race. At any time, there's going to be a threat that you might be infected with Ebola. At any time, there's going to be a threat that people coming from certain countries might be infected with Ebola. They keep trying to reassure us by telling us that Ebola really isn't that contagious. But if it's not that contagious, how do so many doctors and nurses get it when they're wearing head-to-toe protective gear? In some of the pictures I saw, they even had their gloves duct taped on, so it couldn't possibly get in the space between their glove and their sleeve. They're saying they might have accidentally touched their face and gotten it. All of this proves that it's highly contagious. The cases of the nurses getting sick from Ebola in Spain and America, even though they're supposedly wearing head-to-toe protective gear, tells us two things. One, that Ebola is actually highly contagious, maybe a little bit more contagious than they're letting us know. And two, that doctors and nurses in America and Europe are not necessarily trained to not spread infections. In my last video, I talked about a study that I read about online that talked about how often doctors and nurses forgot to wash their hands or wear gloves. After I heard that a nurse in Dallas had Ebola, I did a few searches on Google. The first thing I searched for was hospital errors. The first article that comes up says, hospital errors are the third leading cause of death in the U.S. The next thing I searched for was hospital misdiagnosis rates. One of the first articles that came up was from CBS News. The headline is, 12 million Americans misdiagnosed each year. Then I searched for preventable hospital infections. I found an article from WebMD. 99,000 people die yearly from preventable hospital infections. So as you can see, hospitals in America have a very bad track record for errors, misdiagnoses, and patients getting sick from preventable infections that they acquired in the hospital, that they wouldn't have gotten sick from if they hadn't been in a hospital. This is why a lot of people are afraid to go to the hospital when they're sick. They think, if you go to the hospital when you're sick, you might get sicker rather than get better, or you might even die. And now I'd like to make more dire predictions. This is what I'm afraid is going to happen. I'm not saying that this is going to happen. I'm only saying that it's a possibility that it is going to happen. I'm afraid that life will find a way, and humans won't be able to stop it. First, they're going to say that someone has Ebola. One of the doctors or nurses who treated the patient has Ebola. I already predicted that, and it happened this morning. Then one of the doctors or nurses treating that patient is going to get Ebola. And then a friend or family member is going to get Ebola. And they're going to keep telling us they have it contained. And then what happened in Africa is going to happen in America. All of a sudden they're going to say, we no longer have it contained. Random people are going to be coming down with Ebola. They're not going to be sure who they came in contact with, who exposed them to it. And at that point, they're going to say what they're now saying about Africa. They're going to say, we might not be able to contain Ebola in America. That's what I'm afraid is going to happen. Why would I be afraid that that was going to happen? Because that's exactly what happened in Africa. First they said they had it contained to a few hundred cases. Then they said they had it contained, but it was going to be a small epidemic. And then they said they might not be able to contain it. And even though I think that it's somewhat likely that that could happen in America, I think it's more likely that that could happen in Spain. Actually, I think that that might already be the situation in Spain. The Ebola virus is uncontained in Spain. It's on the loose. Next thing you know, random people are going to be getting it who are completely unconnected with the hospital or the Ebola case. Another thing that I read in the news that worried me was that the man in Texas who had Ebola threw up outside of his apartment. If he threw up outside of his apartment, was the vomit licked up by dogs? Because as we can see from the case in Spain, they think that dogs might be able to catch Ebola and transmit it to people. And even though they say that Ebola cannot be spread by insects, They say it can live on surfaces for hours or even days. Have they proven that it can't be spread by insects? Because if it can live on a surface like this, it could live on the surface of an insect's body. That's what I think. Humans are not robots. Nobody is 100% perfect all the time. And hospitals in America have a bad track record for mistakes. For that reason, I'm very concerned. And I would like everybody who watches this video to stock up on supplies and food and water and pet food, just in case there is an Ebola outbreak. Because I hate to say this. I really hate to say this, but I think that there will be. Now they're telling us that the Ebola outbreak might go on forever. It might never be contained, and it might be a constant threat. But that's how all diseases that we consider to be normal diseases that everyone gets, like the flu or the chickenpox, originally came into the human species. It happened like this.
It's Professor Adrienne Floreen.
Here's what happens. You start with a group of people. They encounter a virus. They become infected. 90% of them die. 10% survive because they have a natural immunity due to a genetic mutation. While this is going on, the virus is still spreading around the world. Eventually, it kills off 90% of the population of the entire planet. 100 years later, the virus and humans coexist due to successful evolution. This is not because the virus has become weaker over time, but because people have become immune to it. This is how all viruses came into the human species. Of course, most of them didn't have a 90% death rate like Ebola can have. The humans that survive have an immune system that makes them the fittest to fight off the virus, or to survive while carrying the virus for a long time without actually recovering from it. Many experts now fear that this is what is going to happen. And now I'd like to talk a little bit more about Murphy's Law. As you can see, right there it says, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. It also says several other quotes that are paraphrases of Murphy's Law. The best laid plans of mice and men will often go astray. That's from Of Mice and Men. The next quote is from a fish song. It's easy sometimes when you just coast along, but like it or not, something always seems to go wrong. I have these quotes on my bulletin board for a reason. They're to warn people to be careful, because things can go wrong when you don't expect it, or when you plan for things to not go wrong, or when you have a contingency plan for things that you have anticipated might go wrong. Things can still go wrong, like they say in the song, or the book, or Murphy's Law. The doctors and nurses that are fighting Ebola should take some advice from Murphy's Law in all of its forms and be very, very careful. Because it's important. This is a thermometer, but the problem with this thermometer when you're considering Ebola is that you have to press the thermometer against your head. Actually, you have to press it pretty hard. And once you've pressed this against someone's head who has Ebola, this is now contaminated. So, you can't use this to test someone's temperature if they have Ebola, or if they might have Ebola.
Why?
Because once you've touched it to their head, it's contaminated.
Wow.
And it's really hard to sterilize it effectively enough that somebody doesn't get it. You'd have to make sure that every single little microscopic surface of this was sterilized, and like there's all kinds of little like cracks and holes and indents in here that would make it hard to sterilize. Hold it up to the camera so the camera can see. I mean, you basically have to soak this in bleach. And even then, getting this close to them might be dangerous enough. If they coughed on you, you might get it. So really, they have to use, like, digital thermometers that take your temperature with a laser from a distance. So have you heard the most recent news about Ebola?
No.
I was about to tell them the latest news on Ebola.
I just like
Cat, you're not supposed to be up there.
Okay, but these next not.
Yeah. Now they're saying that instead of just the protective gear that they're wearing, that they might actually need to wear a respirator and a bodysuit. Because even though it's not airborne, it might as well be, because now they're saying that you actually can get it from breathing it in the air if someone sneezes or coughs if you're in the same room as them. Which is what the conspiracy theorists have been saying for the whole time. I have another webpage up here where they say, many experts have been recommending full-face respirators and positive pressure spacesuits for dealing with people with Ebola. Because the nurses got it even though they were wearing full-body protective gear. It wasn't enough. Because it was letting air in, and when the guy sneezed or coughed, viral molecules got into the air. Basically, even though it doesn't live in the air, if you sneeze or cough, it can go through the air and land on another person. It says, if a symptomatic patient coughs or sneezes, and the mucus or saliva comes in contact with another person's eyes, nose, or mouth, the person can theoretically become infected. Theoretically. So they're trying to say it's possible but not proven. Basically, it can happen. Oh yeah, and the other thing they're saying is that it can live in sperm for more than a few months. So if someone has Ebola and they recover from it, they're
coming on people.
It's sexually transmitted now.
If someone has Ebola and they recover from it, they can still spread it through sperm for 3 months after they've recovered.
Wow, so they should masturbate a lot. That will be.
They're telling them they have to use condoms for 3 months after they recover, at least, so they don't spread it through sperm. Now, come on, condoms are not 100% effective for not spreading diseases. I mean, occasionally condoms break, or I mean, people get pregnant even when they're using condoms.
That's just a myth. Just kidding.
This other webpage says it might spread in ways not observed during past outbreaks, meaning it might become airborne, or it might already be airborne. This cat is now airborne, going up and down. The cat didn't like that very much, did she? And I just noticed that it's after midnight, so it's Columbus Day. One of the things that Columbus did that makes Columbus Day really controversial is he spread smallpox to the Native Americans on purpose by giving them infected blankets. He gave them blankets for people who were infected with smallpox, and because the Native Americans hadn't been exposed to it before, it killed hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions of people. I couldn't find exact numbers on the internet. I don't know if they know exact numbers, but that's the reason that a lot of people think that celebrating Columbus Day is controversial, especially Native Americans. This cat thinks that my dreads are a toy. And that's another reason why people don't trust the government. If you can't even trust them to tell you the truth about Christopher Columbus, then how can you trust them to tell you the truth about Ebola? Oh, and I found it online that the nurses agree with me. One of the National Nurse Associations said that they are not prepared to deal with Ebola patients. I'd also like to clarify a statement that I made in my last video, because several people commented about it online. I said that people send their kids to school while they're sick and possibly infectious, and people go to work while they're sick and possibly infectious. Because people are only allowed to have a certain number of sick days from work before they lose their job. And children are only allowed to miss a certain number of days of school before they get in trouble, or their parents could possibly even get in trouble. And I said that it should be against the law for somebody to go to school while they were sick or go to work while they were sick. I did not mean that people should get in trouble with the law for going to school while they're sick or for going to work while they're sick. I meant that people should not get in trouble with the law for staying home from work while they're sick, or for keeping their kids home from school while their kids are sick. And that employers and teachers should be required to send people home if they think they're sick and possibly infectious. So I was not saying that people should get in trouble or that people should be forced to be quarantined if they're possibly sick. I was saying that people should not get in trouble for keeping themselves home if they think they're sick. And parents should definitely not get in trouble with the law for keeping their kids home from school when they're sick. The policy of reporting parents to child services for their kids missing too much school is ridiculous. If their kids are missing school, they're probably sick. And if they're sick, they probably shouldn't go to school because they could spread diseases. If parents were allowed to keep their kids home from school when they were sick without the fear of being punished for it, then a lot less kids would get sick in school. There's another thing I'd like to say about Ebola, and I already have evidence that it might happen right here on my computer. Ebola could be the thing that ends all war on the planet Earth. If the governments from around the world got together and agreed to send their armies to fight Ebola, rather than to fight each other in wars, that would probably stop the outbreak. That's probably the only thing that could stop the outbreak. And it would be really tragic if next year or a few years from now, if the world looked back and they regretted that they wasted the resources fighting wars that they could have used to stop Ebola before it was too late. And right here I have an article that actually says, it's amazing.
Wait, are we doing this counterclockwise?
U.S. military faces new kind of threat with Ebola. Underneath it is another article that says, Israelis and Palestinians join forces to combat Ebola. Ebola could be the thing that ends all the wars in the world. Because armies will have to fight Ebola. People will have to fight Ebola rather than fighting each other to save humanity. Thank you for watching this episode of Adrienne Floreen Comments on the News. If you liked this video, please watch my other videos on YouTube, including my other episodes of Adrienne Floreen Comments on the News. See you next time.